of course, I don't think any trade deadline conversation is complete without talking about the ongoing drama that is the, you know what? Before we get to this, the ongoing drama between the Nets and the Sixers. I have so many thoughts on this. I could give a fucking TED talk on this topic. There is there are so many thoughts running through my mind. It's like whoever is controlling me in the simulation is just pressing the middle text in a predictive keyboard, and it's just spewing out player names. It's just disrespecting people. It's a fucking mess. But we're gonna let Woj talk about this situation that's going on with Philly and the Nets.
Harden sits out again last night. They've lost 8 straight games. How do we look at James Harden of it all between now and Thursday?
Well, Greeny, start with this, and Ramona Shelburne and I reported this morning on ESPN.com. Daryl Morey called Sean Marks about a month ago, and kind of a perfunctory month out from the trade deadline call that GMs make. But before he hung up, he asked Sean Marks, what about James? And Sean Marks responded, well, James who? Because there are 2 Jameses on the Nets, Johnson and Harden. And Morey assured him it was James Harden, and Sean Marks responded, no. And so they have not spoken again.
James who?
We are 3 days from the trade deadline, and it remains to be seen whether Philly will try to re-engage Brooklyn on James Harden. But like Steve Nash said yesterday, the Nets are listening to James Harden. He's telling them he wants to be there, that he's committed. Now, you can look at it and perhaps see something less than that. They believe him on his injury, the hamstring he's sitting out with. But right now, listen, anything can happen trade deadline week. And when you've lost 8 games in a row, when a player like James Harden is maybe not inspiring the confidence, perhaps you are willing to listen to a massive offer from Philly. But right now, there's no indications that that's going to happen. And Philly has yet to call Brooklyn back. They may just wait till the offseason and pursue James Harden then, when he can either be a free agent, or they could then discuss a sign and trade deal because he has a year left on his deal that he could opt into.
As you guys know, there is no more reliable man, no more reliable reporter in the NBA than ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski. Whatever he says goes. But even I don't think that he knows everything about this situation, because realistically, the only person who knows what he wants to do in regards to this is James Harden. Only James Harden knows whether or not he wants to stay or whether or not he wants to go. And the thing is, James Harden has been in the league for a long time, right? 12 years or so, 11, 12 years, something like that. He's not dumb enough to come out and be like, oh yeah, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to be here. I want to be traded. He's not going to do that, because there are already all of these fucking rumors flying around that he's unhappy. He thinks Steve Nash is a dipshit. He didn't say that Steve Nash is a dipshit, but I said Steve Nash is a dipshit. He's upset that Kyrie Irving is also a dipshit and is making him be the guy. So really all of this started with the latter report. It came out that James Harden was frustrated with pretty much just everything going on in Brooklyn. The coaching situation, the whole situation with him having to be the guy again. And this is a very, very, very unique decision. This is a very unique thing to talk about, because I had a friend text me the other day, and he's like, what the fuck is going on with James Harden? Why is he talking like this? And I'm like, you have to look at it through the eyes of James Harden. So James Harden gets traded from Oklahoma City to Houston. He spends seven or so seasons with the Houston Rockets. No one from that time, from I think it was like 2012, the 2012-13 season to like the 2019-20 season or the 2021 season, nobody in the NBA played more minutes. No one took more shot attempts. No one scored more points. And only 3 guys or 2 guys played more games than James Harden did. Routinely, James Harden was tasked with being the centerpiece of the Houston Rockets offense. It was the James Harden isolation fest. Daryl Morey, Mike D'Antoni asked him to score 50, 60, 70%, score or create 50, 60, 70% of his team's points. They waited to get him a secondary scorer, which really never came, because they did bring in Chris Paul and they did bring in Russell Westbrook, but they weren't the kind of guys who really would have benefited James Harden. Like, he would have benefited way more from someone like Kyrie Irving, for example. But before we get into the weeds and before we actually talk about how those two are even more connected, he was sick of getting the ball every possession, running pick and roll, playing in isolation, because it took a toll on him. It took a toll on his body. He was playing a shitload of minutes, taking a shit ton of shots, and it never worked out. And it didn't work out because every year the Rockets as a team were not up to par with the Golden State Warriors. That's how it was. When James Harden and the Rockets rose to contention, they unfortunately rose to contention alongside one of, if not the greatest dynasties in NBA history. A Golden State Warriors team that struck fear in the eyes of literally everybody. Never before did a group of guys come so close to unseating the 96 Chicago Bulls as the best team in NBA history. They had Steph Curry, when he was playing the most efficient, the craziest basketball of his career. Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, a team that was so deep, top to bottom, without a doubt the strongest team in the NBA at that time, and of course perhaps history. You put up those Golden State Warriors teams with any team that came before them, and they have a shot at downing them in a best-of-7 series. And the Rockets simply could not contend with them. I mean, the Rockets, don't get it twisted, the Rockets did have a bunch of very, very solid teams. That team they compiled in 2016-17 had a legitimate shot to beat the Warriors, and they just got unlucky. Chris Paul is dealing with hamstring issues. You missed 27 threes in a row, like straight up unlucky. But James Harden, Chris Paul, Clint Capella, Trevor Ariza, PJ Tucker, Luke Mbamute, that team was 7 guys deep, packed with defensive titans, shooters. The floor was so open. James Harden had all the space to do whatever the fuck he wanted. And they fell short. And from that point on, Tillman Fajita, whatever the fuck his name is, he comes in as the owner and immediately starts just fucking the team up, right? Doesn't want to pay these guys that want to get paid. Doesn't want to go into the luxury tax to contend for a championship. It was bullshit. It was straight up bullshit. And unfortunately, Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni really had no control over this because it wasn't their money that they were spending. So fast forward a little bit, James Harden announces that he no longer wants to be a member of the Houston Rockets. And you can't blame him because of all the shit that he did, all the points he put up, all the assists he created, all the money he spent at those Houston area strip clubs. It didn't manifest for him. So it comes down to him going to Philly or him going to Brooklyn. And somehow the Houston Rockets sent him to Brooklyn and got fucked over 10 times over by the trade. Did not land any of the assets that were traded in that deal. They missed out on Jared Allen. They missed out on Karis LeVert. I mean, they did have Victor Oladipo, who is a very talented player when he's healthy, but then even they traded him to Miami. Just, again, ownership being bad. But what really did it for Harden was that he would have gone to Brooklyn and without a doubt been the third guy. And he was content with being the third guy. At least it appeared, because he would not be asked to do the same things that he had been doing in Houston, right? There was Kevin Durant there, who everyone knows when you need a bucket, you're giving the ball to Kevin Durant. But even without that, there was still Kyrie, who could carry the offensive burden for extended periods of time. And then, of course, you had everybody else on that team, namely Joe Harris. I mean, they did have Jeff Green, Bruce Brown, Blake Griffin. That team was fantastic. Last year's Nets team was a great team. And unfortunately, the injuries got the better of them. But you can't really factor that into Harden's frustration because injuries happen. I mean, he's been injured. He was injured last year. Like, it would be unfair for him to be upset with having to be the guy. It'd be upset for him having to be the guy because everyone's hurt, and then Kevin Durant not feel the same thing, because Kevin Durant is kind of in a similar spot to James Harden where, I mean, well, in the sense that he's aging, you know, he's had a couple serious injuries throughout his career. Like, he's not able to do the same things that he once was. And for Kevin Durant to at least remain content on the outside, it says something. But I think what really did it for James Harden was the whole incident with Kyrie and the vaccine, because Kyrie's refusal to get vaccinated automatically shows you that he is not committed to winning a title. That's how it is, straight up. You don't want to play in half your team's home games. You don't want to play in potentially 4 of the 7 games in a best of 7 playoff series if the Nets were lucky enough to secure home court advantage. What the fuck kind of like how would that make you feel? Everyone else on the team got vaccinated. But for Kyrie Irving to essentially spit in the faces of his teammates because he's got this fucking he's like doing this moral posturing where he doesn't want to get the vaccine for whatever dumbass reason. Like, I think that's where it clicked for James Harden. And he's like, if I'm going to have to be the guy, because he has been having to be the guy, he might as well go and do it in Philly or somewhere else where at least the team is contending for a championship. And of course, this is an entirely different conversation. If Kevin Durant doesn't sprain his MCL, if Joe Harris doesn't have all of these issues with his ankle surgery and with his ankle rehab, and of course, if Kyrie decides to get the shot. And then also going back a little further, if Steve Nash isn't the fucking head coach of the team. All right, I'm not even going to get into it. So Philadelphia is hearing these, and I'm sure they're helping perpetuate these rumors because the whole point of reports being leaked is for one team to control the narrative. If there is a narrative that is anti one team, you can assume that it's being leaked by an unhappy player or a team that is trying to secure a certain player. While I don't think James Harden is unhappy, I do think he's a little disgruntled with the situation, which of course is totally understandable. You can try to read into it by him taking all these nights off to rehab, to do this, to do that, as him saying, he's quit on the team. And, well, I don't want to go that far because I never want to pull the effort card with an athlete because I think it's exceptionally disrespectful to pull that shit with an athlete who like plays this game for a living and who is trying to excel at it and win a championship and help cement their legacy. And that's another thing. James Harden knows that his legacy is connected to the championships because this guy's won MVPs. He's a perennial all-star. He's a perennial NBA player. Statistically is probably arguably the greatest offensive talent the NBA has ever seen. But for him to realistically be considered in the same tier as Kobe and as D Wade, he needs to win a title. Like, that's the only thing separating him between so many guys in the upper echelon. And of course, this goes with Kevin Durant. This goes with Steph Curry. This goes with LeBron. This goes with Kawhi. With all these guys who he's come up with who have seen on paper more success than he has. And I think he understands that. I think he understands that better than anyone else, obviously. Now that we understand the lore of James Harden and how this situation got here, what is the next step? And I always felt that if I were Sean Marks, I would do my best to reassure James Harden that he is the priority ahead of Kyrie Irving. The Nets did this whole fucking social posturing bullshit with Kyrie Irving and not allowing him to play, which ultimately fucked them over because they knew they were going to bring him back anyway. Whether you wanted him to help contribute to your team winning, whether you wanted him to play so that way he could boost his trade value, he was coming back. And from the jump, I would have done everything to try to trade Kyrie because this pandemic is not going anywhere. The vaccine mandates in certain cities are not going anywhere. If anything, they're only going to expand to more cities like Los Angeles, like Philadelphia, like Boston, like all of the major cities in which NBA teams play. You got to get rid of Kyrie if that's the case. And then you sit with James Harden and, you don't necessarily not take calls from teams calling about him. I do feel like there are very few players who you don't even entertain the conversation, Giannis, LeBron, Kevin Durant. But there's nothing wrong with hearing a pitch from another team and also just kind of seeing like where the league values your talent. Because if Daryl Morey calls up Sean Marks, first of all, reminder, in this situation, the Sixers do not have any leverage because ultimately they are still trying to offload a player who is adamant about not playing because he feels disrespected by the franchise. You could argue that the Nets are in the same position, but at least James Harden has fucking played for them this year and only recently has started dealing with a hamstring issue, which is recurring. And of course, that whole issue with his hand, I don't really know where that came from, but ultimately Philadelphia has no leverage in this situation because even if they want to try to pursue James Harden in the offseason, the asking price is going to be so fucking large. I'm going to refer to their roster just so I can show you how much exactly the Sixers are going to have to part ways with. At the bare minimum, I can't even highlight Ben Simmons because he's not on here. So remember, Ben Simmons. You're going to have to part with some combination of these guys. Tyrese Maxey, get this the fuck out of here. Seth Curry, Matisse Thybulle, Danny Green, and we'll throw Shake Milton in there as well. So in addition to Ben Simmons, Philly is going to have to part with probably 3 of these guys. You're looking at Tyrese Maxey. If I'm Sean Marks, I am not taking anything less than Ben Simmons, Tyrese Maxey, and some combination of either Danny Green, Seth Curry, and Matisse Thybulle, right? At least one of those 3, preferably 2 of those 3, because remember, you have every reason as Sean Marks to be as ruthless as you want in this situation, because not only is Philadelphia a divisional rival, they are an interconference team, or they are a conference team, I should say, who is knocking on the door of contention on the shoulders of their fucking beast in the middle, this guy, Joel Embiid. This dude who is in the running for the MVP award. This dude who's averaging damn near 30 points and 11 rebounds, shooting almost 50% from the field. That right there is enough to guarantee the Sixers as a second round lock, or even a fucking conference finals lock. God damn. You want to strip them of all of their depth, because look at this. That leaves Joel Embiid in, Tobias Harris, and you get James Harden as well. But as we've seen with the Brooklyn Nets, when your team does not have the depth that everyone thought they would, it crumbles. The situation crumbles. You start relying on Kessler Edwards and James Johnson and Day'Ron Sharpe. And while, Edwards and Sharpe have been great, they're not guys who you seriously want to consider in the rotation of a championship season. Like, they're not getting any time outside of garbage time if Brooklyn is entirely healthy. Straight up. That's not the case. Like, you want to put the Sixers at as much of a disadvantage as possible. And just be like, okay, you want James Harden? Give us all your assets. And if you're not willing to part with Tyrese Maxey and Matisse Thybulle, you can get fucked. Now, ultimately, the question then shifts to, how likely do you think this trade is? And I'm going to be on the fence about it because I'm a dumb little bitch and I absolutely despise. Actually, I don't even know where I'm going with this conversation. I'm going to be on the fence with it because I love the uncertainty that comes with the NBA trade deadline. And I don't want to say yes, mainly because I don't want to see James Harden go. But I also don't want to say no because I know that the relationship is stressed. Although James Harden has said that these reports, if you don't hear them from me, they don't matter. James Harden has said that he wants to be here and he's committed to helping the team win a championship. Kevin Durant has said that he wants to stay with James Harden and win a championship. And as we know, Kevin Durant is a very influential voice in the NBA. Coaching staff listens to him. Upper management listens to him. His teammates listen to him. He wants James Harden to stay. Steve Nash straight up came out and said, no, we're not trading James Harden. Of course, he doesn't know. He's not involved in basketball operations at any point. But still, people made the great point, including Mark Stein. He didn't have to answer this. We've seen coaches in the past when they're asked about a potential player being traded, and they're just like, that's something you talk to the general manager about. Or, I don't know. I don't work in the front office. Steve Nash was like, no, we're not trading James Harden. Now, ultimately, Steve Nash doesn't know what Sean Marks is going to do. No one knows what Sean Marks is going to do. Only Sean Marks knows what he's going to do. And as it appears, he remains committed to salvaging the relationship. But if the 76ers, if they call you on Wednesday and they're like, we have an offer for you, and they give you 4 players, they give you Simmons, Maxey, Thybulle, and Seth Curry, and then you also get a pick from someone, a first-round pick, and then a couple seconds. I could see them swinging a trade for it. I could, because this Nets team, I don't know what the fuck happened. I don't know what went wrong with them. I don't know who they disrespected to get so unlucky. But to have all this stuff with Kyrie, and then for Joe Harris to need ankle surgery, and now him having a potential setback on his ankle surgery, and then Kevin Durant's freak knee injury, and then this whole thing with James Harden. It's just so unlucky. And then on top of that, they're not even winning games. They've lost 8 in a row, 7 in a row, whatever it is. At some point, you have to, again, just like you're swinging for the fence for James Harden, you gotta try something, right? And listen, Ben Simmons, people say what you will about Ben Simmons. He's a baby. He's soft. He sucks. Whatever. Well, I mean, you can say that he sucks, but that is objectively not true. He's a fantastic young talent on both ends of the floor. You get Matisse Thybulle, who's a demon on defense. You get Tyrese Maxey, and you get Seth Curry. Two guys who, between them, are averaging 31 points a game. Both of whom shooting 40% or 41%, we'll round up, we'll be generous, 41% from the field. And right away, this team looks entirely different. And then you have Kyrie Irving whenever the fuck he decides to play. And then you also have Joe Harris, hopefully coming back at some point. You also have Bruce Brown, DeAndre Bembry, LaMarcus Aldridge. Like, this is an entirely different team. And then, of course, the counter to that is, well, Steve Nash is going to have to adjust his game to a different team. And my counter to that is, well, Steve Nash doesn't have a game plan. Have you watched the Nets this year? They just kind of vibe. That's it. Like, Steve Nash has no thoughts, just vibes. That's his scheme as a head coach. That's like when you load up Madden and you're looking through all the coaches, the kinds of playbooks that they have. It's like, oh, 4-3 over, 3-4. Like, Steve Nash is just vibes. That's it. Both ends of the floor, just vibes. This dude is a fucking Skyrim NPC. But ultimately, I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen. I hope James Harden stays, but as much as it kills me to say it, I could see why the Nets would move on. But I think just for the sake of content, yes, I think, pardon me, yes, I think he's going to stay. And this could very well change as soon as I shut the stream off. Like, that's how quickly this shit moves.